Good
Okay, we're
afternoon.
good to go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. Apologize for the delay. I was having some technical difficulty. With me this afternoon, I have board members Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig, Janine Randolph, and I also have Ralph Valenzizi and Kimberly Bird Carolina. And with that, I will transfer the meeting over to Ralph.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
wait, I
Oh, a
forgot.
minute. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, approval of minutes. Was everybody able to read, and are there any changes or updates?
No changes.
Thank you. Mary Ellen?
Um, Diana, I was absent for that meeting,
Oh,
so
that's right.
I will
Okay.
be abstaining.
Okay, thank you. So we moved the minutes forward. I didn't see any issues or changes. Thank you. All right, Ralph, you're up. Thank you.
Great, great. And thank you, Chairman Carpione. Good afternoon, board members. I'm glad we could all get together a little bit earlier to, I guess it's nice to have summer hours like this to be able to get things moving a little bit earlier than just a regular night meeting. Tonight, though, or this afternoon, really, we have a couple of quick items that we wanted to cover. Oh, okay. We had a couple of quick items that we really wanted to cover. Really, they're follow-ups from things that we've already discussed. So we have a regulation for our fundraising. So to give you an update on what we've done and how we're moving it forward, and a couple of minor edits that we made from the last reading that we had of it. Same thing with the field trip policy. So the policies themselves are both in place, fundraising and field trips. It's really the regulation that we're talking about. And we made a couple more edits from the last meeting that we had, and I just wanted to share that those have been made, and we'd be moving that forward. And then the last item, really, I guess I can talk about right now, and then we'll get into the two regulations, is our cell phone policy, because I know that this is something that a lot of people have been talking about, and we've spent quite a bit of time working on this year. Just so you're aware, we've tried to make sure that we're hitting every stakeholder group to get feedback on how we want to approach the cell phone policy. If you remember earlier this year, we had students present on the work that they had done on the cell phone policy. From there, we took that work and we actually brought it back to the staff. And then the staff actually worked on surveys and gave us feedback, and we made edits to the cell phone policy since then. And that same survey we have now ready for parents. We didn't want to release the survey during the summer to the parents because we felt like we may not get a lot of people to respond. So we are waiting till the first week of school to be able to release that survey and get some information. And then ideally, we'll be able to gather that data to see if there's any other edits that we can make to present a regulation now for you guys to move forward with on cell phones. And I'll be bringing that to you in September is the goal. So that our next meeting will actually talk really about cell phones and just the feedback there. So I'm actually looking forward to it. It was a great process. The kids did a great job. Teachers and staff gave us some good feedback, and I'm sure we'll probably get a lot of good feedback from the parents as well. So, we just, I want to do this thoughtfully, and we want to make sure, Dr. Estrella wants to make sure we do this thoughtfully as well, so that we just want to take a little bit of time to put it in place, make sure that we've talked to everybody, and then we'll start with that implementation, sometime in the at the beginning now of the school year, September, Octoberish, once it's in place. So that's really the quick update on that cell phone policy. I know there was another question about um, some things with our library, our choice of library books, and then there have been made some changes at the state level. There's been a lot of workshops. I know, Mary Ellen, you've attended a few of them to talk about what we need to have in place for just deciding on what books we actually have in our libraries. I think in the process of this, we realized that we were actually about a year ahead of the game, and we actually have a very, very good policy and regulation in place. There was one little edit that, if you remember, we talked about back then that had to do with whether or not someone from outside of the city could actually, a non-resident could actually put in to remove books from our libraries, and we did allow that option for them to put in a submission. It doesn't mean that you had to accept to even agree to it. But now they're basically, I think the state's saying, the advice is to not have that in there. So I'll be bringing that back to you to just take that piece out. But we're also having our library media specialists, their first day of professional development that's coming next week. They'll be actually reviewing a lot of that documentation and what we have in place and see if there's any revisions as well. So what I'd like to do in October, we'll actually bring back the library media form so that you can then take a look at that as well, to be able to know if there's any modifications beyond the ones that the state has already kind of recommended from our own library media specialist. So that's part of their professional development this year, and they're really excited to be involved so much in the process, since it really does affect them quite a bit. So we're looking forward to that too. So just a little bit of a heads up on the next couple of months of what we'll be working on. With that in mind, any questions on that at all, or?
Yes, I would like to make a comment about our media specialists. They were there rolling their sleeves up when we put the policy together. They were the guiding light. They're on the ground working as the lead librarians. And what I was so proud of is that when I attended some of these meetings, they were ours from Norwalk, a guiding light for the state. When Bob Duff and I'm not sure what her name is, but another Congress person put together the bill that has been passed, they look to some of our leaders in Norwalk to help guide them, along with some other media specialists around the state. So they have done us proud, and I've learned a lot from them. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to their leadership.
Oh, definitely, thanks. And I know I look at that as obviously my other hat is like that's one of my departments. But as we kind of move forward, one of the things I think that we talk about leaders. I'm always so proud of what goes on in Norwalk because a lot of our teachers do act as leaders, even at the state level. They're very, very involved and have we have an incredible staff that really is moving forward with our kids and stuff, but also making sure that they're helping to make changes that need to happen in education. So this is just one example of many that you'd see on a regular basis. So thank you though. So I know I can't speak on behalf of all of them, but on behalf of all of them, I'm sure they appreciate that. So, great, thanks. So with that, if it's okay, I'd like to just kind of jump into our two policies, our two regulations that we'll talk about today. I set this up in a way so that ideally what I would do is just kind of walk through some updates, and then I can refer back to the policy to show you a red line of some of the changes that we've made. So just to review and to keep us on task, I'm going to do, that's not what we want to do. Hopefully you can see my screen right now.
Yes,
So
I can see it.
So we're really here to talk about two policies, fundraising and also the field trip policy. And we wanted to make sure that we actually put them in place correctly. So starting off with the fundraising policy, um, some of the key points in the policy, just to review again, um, students can engage in fundraising for school-sponsored activities. We want to make sure that there's no necessarily door-to-door solicitation by students without adult supervision. These are some of the highlights that have been in place. The board isn't responsible for unapproved activities. I mean, it's like and that's actually stated in the policy itself. All activities must comply with state and federal laws. And the reason that we have a regulation in place now is to help to guide people to make sure that they can stick to the policy. They keep our kids safe, they keep themselves safe in this whole process. So, sorry, I tried to come up with some creative ways of looking at these slides instead of just straightforward. But how do we know if your fundraising policy is going to your fundraising activity is going to be approved? We want to make sure that in the fundraising that there's a designated adult that's in place, that there's some kind of educational benefit, that the district doesn't have any additional costs from the fundraising, that it's appropriate for any for whatever age it is, that it's voluntary. Okay, people are not expected to do it. It is definitely a voluntary. We don't endorse any business or products when we do this, and they've just got to be compliant with state laws. Highlights from anything smaller than $10,000 there's a written request now that's been put into place, and I have um, shared once with the PTOC already over the summer on what that would look like. And I've asked the PTOC to have the PTAs reach out to me so I can come out and help them with, just using the form. But it's a pretty straightforward form. I think everybody was, in the initial conversations was pretty comfortable with it. They'll have a submission that they can place into the principal. Within 2 weeks of that, they will get an answer. And then the next step is it gets forwarded to the superintendent. And then we will turn that around. We wanted to have a quick turnaround within a week of just whether or not it's approved or not. With activities up to 10,000, this is one where, it may be a small little fundraiser and stuff like this. These would not be the ones that would be necessarily flagged at the board level, but the superintendent still does need to, or designee needs to approve them. If it's over $10,000, same process, except it will also go to the board for FYI. So it's not going to you for board approval. It's already been approved by the superintendent, but you need to be aware of it. And I think those were some of the things that we wanted to make sure that were in the policy. And so this is for anything that they're estimating will be a fundraiser that's going to raise a large amount of money. One of the new areas of fundraising is what we call crowdfunding. And this is really, using tools that are out there like a GoFundMe. We want to make sure that they follow guidelines that are needed. So in order to do that, we want to make sure that those actually have prior approval. And with that, we also want to make sure that they're using safe websites. So we are asking them to put in information like the website, the description, what are they going to be posting online and stuff, so that, including images, because a lot of times we want to make sure that if we're putting pictures up of students, that students have signed off on a media release. Those types of things that sometimes can be overlooked in something like a crowdfunding site. We just want to make sure we keep it safe. We want to make sure that they know that how they're going to be able to, they've got to explain how they're going to be able to, hang on to those funds when they come in. And it's just going to make sure that it applies with all board policies. So we're making sure that the form allows for that to happen, which it does. And then just some of the key points. We want to make sure that it complies with all of our policies and procedures. I keep saying that over and over again because that's really the goal of this. And the final piece was we are asking them to just give us a brief annual summary, like, how many funds and what are the activities that you were able to raise funding for. We feel like this is important not only to just kind of have a good grasp of what's happened, but it also will allow us, as we start talking about our budget cycle, to be able to show, we try to show from a philanthropy standpoint what money is coming in, but I think it's important that we actually also share, how much money our parents raise for our schools at the same time. So you do have another data point that can be used through that budget cycle. So with that, let me pause for a second as I pull up another document to show you the couple of edits that were made. Any questions so far on this? Because I know this is stuff that we've actually covered already.
No questions, but that's the important thing to remind the public is we've been talking about this for months, so it's nothing new. So if we don't have any questions, that is why we have nothing new. And we did have the input of all the PTAs and PTOs and the PTOC. So.
Yes, and just to add to that, one of the uh, adjustments what that I recall was made, and it's present here in the lead time for notification to the school system. 2 weeks, not it was doesn't have to be a very long lead time for these activities. So it is a product of a lot of back and forth from different groups, and that's why I'm good with it also.
Okay. And if I can just take a moment now, so this was actually what we had reviewed, the actual regulation. At the last meeting, we had a couple of things that were asked to be made for changes, so I've highlighted those. Um, this first one was the one that I just mentioned in the slide. Anything over $10,000. This was my error of putting it in for approval at the board. It's for information at the board. It's still approved by the superintendent, prior to that, but you should be made aware of it. So that's this. This is one minor change. Uh, Crowdfunding activities, there were some questions on the revised language. So we wanted to make sure that there was an approval prior to getting started. And so we've added that in, as highlighted in yellow. And then at the end of the school year, we just wanted to make sure that it was a very simple understanding that there's a summary of funds raised. So those were the couple of minor changes that were made since our last conversation, and I think we've actually now gotten it to the point where the regulation is able to move forward. Um, and I think that's my presentation on the fundraising one. I don't know if there's any other questions. I know that, like you said, we've shared it enough. But if there's no other questions, I can move on to the second.
I have just one other comment about the very last of that. Go all the way down. About the organization will submit a summary of funds raised. In one sense, it sounds like we're asking a lot of extra work, but in the way we were discussing it, normally you keep track of what funds you're getting, and it could just be a copy, a photocopy of what your summary is. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be paragraph form. It can be just what you keep as your record and then
Yeah.
share with us, so that there's the ease of that, not piling on more work for these volunteers, these wonderful parents that are volunteering their time.
Yeah, and they have to report, like I said, as a 501(c)(3), they need to report this as well. So the reporting that they're doing is fine for us. Sometimes though, I mean, I think that, Marian, one of the things that we would like to know, and this is something that is not a lot of work, is like, what are the types of fundraisers that you had? Well, we had a school fair, we had this, we had that. Just in not in detail, but just so we know how they were raising those funds, and that may also assist us to be able to know how, first of all, how we make our money, but then in many ways that can also help other places too, to know. It's like, if these things are raising money for a certain school, would it be something that another school would be also interested in? Yeah, so it's really more of that transparency. But yeah, otherwise, there's really not a lot of change. We're making it very, very simple for them to be able to not have a lot of work. Great. Okay, so let me get on to the next one. Um, Apologize, I'm working off one screen today. And this was our field trip regulation. So if you remember, the whole purpose of having our field trip regulation in place is we wanted to make sure that our field trips are, first of all, are educationally viable and valuable, that we have procedures in place for approving them, and making sure that there's planning that's being put into place in the way that we would like as a standard, and then that there's also execution in the way that it's set up. We want to ensure student safety, and that was something that we talked about a lot in a variety of different ways of making sure that's in the regulation. And that's also in alignment with what's going on in our schools. And we wanted to make sure that this applies to all things that happen outside of our school grounds. So just to review one more time, so some of our definitions that we have in regulation, just to make it clear for everybody what a field trip is. That we have a trip leader, a faculty leader, that's actually helping to oversee the field trip from the school side. We talked a lot about chaperones. And one of the things that you'll see that was changed, and I think Diana, you had brought up, is we wanted to make sure that when we actually labeled them as a chaperone has to be an NPS employee, but we wanted to make sure it was designated that they're a current NPS employee. So that's actually now been changed, and you'll see that in the edit. That volunteers and parents are not official chaperones for ratio calculations. So, and this once again refers to anything that's like a multi-day field trip. And we'll talk about that in just a minute on what that really looks like. The approving authorities that are in this. So you're going to have your principal is one of the approving authorities that the form goes first to the principal. From there, it goes to Mary Ann and Allison's department as the educational leaders. From there, if there's funding that a criteria with it, it goes to the finance department as well as then the superintendent. And then finally, for certain trips, it actually also goes to the Board of Ed. Single day trips that are just one calendar day and no overnight is one definition. We have multi-day trips, which means that it's more than one day and overnight. We have what we consider in-state trips within Connecticut, and then out-of-state trips outside of Connecticut. So the trips that go for, and we'll go through this in a minute, but I just wanted to explain it now, is the trips that go to the beyond Marianne and Allison, a single day trip is something that's just approved by the principal. So meaning if they're going to the to the Maritime Center, those are not trips necessarily that are being approved through this approval process. It just follows that they have to follow the process, and principals still need to follow the process of what we're saying are things that have to be in place, but it does not come to central office. Central office receives multi-day out-of-state trips, and then certain trips with those are also coming to the board. And so we'll take a look at those in just a minute. Any questions so far? Or we talked a lot about planning your trip. Some of the things that we wanted to make sure that were in the form is that there's an educational value, that there are timelines being put in place, and that no fundraising starts until you get your approvals. Safety plans and supervision have to be kind of outlined there. So we've actually added that into the trip. So to the trip form, to making sure that all of those pieces are in place. And that it's stated that if there is a concern at one point or another with safety, that the board or the superintendent can actually pull back on a trip. Okay. And then it almost goes without saying, but wherever we are, our students follow our code of conduct. Okay. So the field trip process, the approval. So to start a field trip, usually it starts at the building level, and it's the trip lead submits the field trip request form online. The principal then does the initial review and written approval. If it's a single day trip, they verify that it has all the pieces in place, and then they can actually approve that. So once again, this is like if they're going to the Maritime Center, or if they're going over to Stepping Stones, or those types of trips where it's not something that would necessarily come down to central office necessarily for approval, but it is expected that it's documented and it actually follows the same process. The executive director of leadership development approval happens for any trips that are out of state and multi-day. Now, if there's a higher cost to it, so if there's, once it hits that threshold of $20,000, it's conditional with the finance department. There's a conditional review for that to make sure that they're using the correct approved vendors, as we discussed. And that happens after we've actually gone through the process of making sure that it has educational value, that all the other components, the safety plan and everything else is in place. Then it goes to finance, and then it would actually, if it's for superintendent and board approval, those are for multi-day trips that are domestic and international. Um, those are the ones that you normally receive at the board meeting. By the time they come to the board meeting, they've actually gone through the whole process. There will be actually the online form that's going to be completely filled out so that we know when it was filled out and that all the components are in place. And some of the things that were also asked in there is that you'd ask that the superintendent has the ability to be able to communicate directly with vendors. So that's actually been also placed into the regulation to make sure that vendors understand that that is something that the superintendent has the ability to be able to do. We set down some deadlines. I know we had a couple of discussions around this, and I'll explain it a little bit more. So, single day trips, we kind of landed on 15 school days prior to the trip. So a couple of weeks prior to be able to have it in place. Principals should know and be able to kind of set that up for them. For multi-day trips that are domestic, at least 60 calendar days. Um, Multi-day trips that are international, at least 120 calendar days prior. But all of these fall with the parameter that if there's fundraising that has to happen, they've got to make sure that they get this in quickly because any fundraising that goes on has to be approved. So if there even is a smaller trip, we will expedite that as quickly as possible, but so that they can start their fundraising, but it's still they cannot fundraise prior to getting at least an approval. So if these calendar pieces are in place. There may be a trip where if there's a trip that there is no cost to, usually that wouldn't happen for an international trip. But if there was, predominantly, you could stick to the 120 calendar days. Chances are, though, many of them will come in a year ahead of time now because they start fundraising a year ahead of actually a trip happening. So I think we've nailed down the language to make sure that all those dates are there as kind of a minimum requirement for handing in, but there's a underlying piece that any fundraising, you have to get it approved before fundraising starts. So that could actually extend that timeline much longer than 120 days. Chaperones was another question. So we made sure that they were current, which was the biggest change. Um, and we also added in some language that there's a designated chaperone that would stay behind or that would be there in case on an international trip or another trip that a student, for some reason or another, was in the hospital, could not come home, whatever it may be, was detained in some way or another, that a chaperone would be there to stay with that student. That student would not be left alone. Transportation was another item that's in there. Um, we talked about that the arrangements for transportation need to be made through the transportation department or district approved vendors. So, Joanna already really does work very closely with all these trips for bus trips that go to the Maritime Center and so forth. And, kudos to her. She does an incredible job of being able to do this. For the larger trips, those would be coordinated by the vendors that were once again approved as part of the process. Um, they need to follow the same procurement rules. So if it's over $20,000, it's really a district approved vendor. And Linda and I have discussed this, and he'll make sure that that's actually in place when he does the approval. Students cannot transport themselves. So that is something that we want to make sure that is understood. And the coach buses, the transportation director will go back and just verify, that it's a company that we should be working with. In many cases, usually it's Joanna giving them the company to work with that we already have approved. But in case there is another company that kind of comes into play, we want to make sure that they're actually vetted as well. Permissions. Parent and guardian permission is needed. The form must include emergency contact information, medical information, and any types of consents. And for multi-day trips, if there's any insurance or liability needed, that needs to be actually documented as well. Funding, so cost for these, in many cases, funding can sometimes come from school-sponsored groups to be able to pay for some of this funding. We want to make sure that no students, as we discussed, are denied participation due to the inability to pay for a trip. So trip advisors work with principals, and we do this already to ensure that there's equity for all of our students and financial assistance when needed. Fundraising field trips must comply with the policy, and the policy is stated within it. So once again, it goes back to that same fundraising one that we just discussed. And trips over $20,000, coordination for vendor selection and procurement process is done with the finance department. Cancellations were the last things. So if there is, the trip lead has a responsibility to communicate to people if there's going to be a cancellation, which includes the vendors that have been used for this and parents. If the district decides to cancel or postpone anything, they have the ability to do that if it's for safety concerns or any other concerns. Usually it's safety, health, weather, so forth. School cancellations. Principals can cancel due to insufficient participation, if they don't have lack of chaperones, or if there's other issues. So there's the ability to cancel a trip if circumstances arise, and if a trip is going to be canceled, the trip lead is actually the one that has to really work on helping, just like they organize it. They're the ones that help notify families. They can reach out to the principal and finance department and others to be able to help support and what needs to be said and so forth. But they really do need to be that lead as they set up the trip to be able to make sure that the cancellation is there. And with that, any questions? And then I can share out the any changes that we made.
Ralph, when are we trying to get this all set and good to go?
So this is actually in place for the let me start with the field trip one since we're on that subject. We've been testing the form. We do have a couple that we have in right now that have been submitted that'll be on one of your next board meetings. We walked them through manually on paper. So, but all the steps of these have been done. We're really working through the forms just to make sure the workflow works correctly, because there's multiple people if then statements that kind of happen when the form's going through for the automation. But we have some of them actually testing it online, but they've already done it manually. So Allison and Marianne have those. They've actually been vetted with all the parameters that are in place. So anything that you see there is in place. I do believe there was one or two trips that were brought in right now over the summer that'll come to the next board meeting for that approval. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure that there's a couple that we've actually put into place.
So we don't need to worry about any overlap or anything with people missing deadlines?
No, because what we said is like basically the way that we'll backfill it is by doing it manually right now. But we're following the same parameters, even though we're, in that process. How do I say this? Even though anything that's done online is being done manually at the same time to make sure that, the finance is still approving if it's over $20,000 and looking at the vendors, and we're making sure the safety plan is correct and that it's included when it does come to you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, definitely. And then the timeline for the fundraising one, like I said, I've actually shared with the PTOC that the form is there. Theirs is a very simple form. It's actually hang on one second. Well, actually, sorry, let me finish the field trip form and then I'll show you real quickly what the fundraising form looks like. So with the field trip item, a couple of changes that we made to the regulation from the last conversation we had, and they were highlighted in the PowerPoint, is the chaperone has to be current, and that the chaperone also needs to stay with the student in case there's an issue with the student. There always has to be one that stays with the student. Other changes, it was really more the language that and this was once again on my part, the Executive Director of Leadership Development, Marianne and Allison, do not approve single day trips. That's done really at the building level. It's anything that becomes larger than that. So we made that adjustment. We talked about the fact that we want to make sure that the superintendent has the ability to communicate directly with vendors if he or she wishes to do so. And I believe that was the last change. The rest of it was what we shared before. Any questions at all on the field trip side of the regulation?
So on the field trip side, my question or really statement is a broad stroke. The real issue to be that has been addressed is not to start fundraising before you have approval.
Yes.
And so I think you've stated it pretty clearly, but hopefully it will change the mindset so that the first thing when you're looking at quite a bit of money for whatever the good field trip to be planned, that the first thing is to get approval. Yes. And then start fundraising. And so I think that's perhaps that has always been there in a kind of, oh, this is the procedure we do, but it new people come in and they may not have been informed, and so things went sideways as we experienced last year. So this is really clear, and what my comment is, I'm hoping, and I think you will be doing this, that you really do communicate with the parent groups, and that they communicate with their people who are working in this volunteer fashion, so they understand that it's not a punitive thing. It's a really caution that we want the safety for our children, and that it needs to be shared early on. So yeah. we won't be facing, we forgot to do that. No, we're not going to forget to do that, because that's the very first step when you're looking at raising quite a bit of money. First, get approval, then go ahead.
Yeah. And, I've had a number of conversations too, and that's one of the reasons why actually the online form, we've been able to set the parameters in place really well, but we also want to make sure we message it in a way that everybody does exactly what you just said, Mary Ellen, understands it.
Right. Get that word out so nobody's, put on back heel. Oh, I didn't realize that. We want everybody to know. And, yes. and that you're a really good communicator, and I know you feel that's important. So I'm encouraging that. Really communicate. And it's wonderful for any parents that might be listening to this, that they hear the intent, that the intent is just that all the moving parts have sort of a hub to move around, and the hub is the leadership in the school system. So that's a good reason to share that information before you start raising money.
Yes.
So thanks. Good job. I mean, it's complex. Were you forced to rewrite forms, or could you just use most of the forms that were used before? Was that a big part of this task, to get the forms consistent?
Yeah. So I think from the technical standpoint, a lot of the questions were still relevant. Some of them were not. So on the form, the issues are really some of the workflows. Once it gets approved, who does it go to? How do they help vet it? And even simple things like, Do you attach a PDF or do you put in a text file? Is it easier? Because then how do we print it out so that then when it gets presented to the board, will it be in a format that makes it easy for you to kind of go through and approve it and see what all the
Right.
questions?
So this is nitty gritty stuff, and
Yeah.
that hopefully is spelled out so clearly that any new person can look at it as the, oh, okay,
Yeah.
1, 2, and 3. I'll do all of those 3 things.
Definitely. And so the ones that I think will be coming to the board though for this current month, the hand done ones will not be in that format because we're still working on the online form piece of it. But they will have the same information. So.
And that's fine. And
Yeah.
assuming these are going to be the, 3-month, 4-month ahead of time before.
Yeah,
Right.
Great.
Great.
Yep. And then just a quick, so you can kind of see what the fundraising one looks like. It's really just a few questions. The name of the organization, who are they, the contact people, details and their email, details of the fundraising activity. This looks a lot longer because it's not the preview, it's just a preview of it. So you can see all the questions when it goes from page to page. What's the purpose? Brief description, the dates, anticipated funds. So then if it's under the threshold, it doesn't have to go through a lot of process. If it's over, then we want to make sure you're aware of it. And then just an approval at the end. There's the approval process and stuff. And then if there's a need for superintendent's approval, depending on the fundraising piece, it's available there. So we can actually then print this off. So it's a very, very easy form for them to fill out. It'll make it very, very simple for the PTOs. When I did discuss this with the PTOC, I feel like they were comfortable, and now really they just we're just trying to coordinate times for me to kind of get out there or someone on my team to just show them how to use the form.
It looks like a very clean form.
Mhm.
And I think if there were no other questions, Chairman Carpio, I'm at the end of my presentation for the night.
Okay, and the cell phone policy?
Yeah. That was the one that we talked about at first. It really was an update to know
Okay,
what
so we're not moving anything. We're not voting on anything.
No, really, the
No,
regular
everything was reviewing, making sure that all our changes that we asked for are in. So the review of the fundraising regulation, the review of the field trip regulation, and just the discussion of the cell phone policy. No, we're good to go. Any other questions? Nothing. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for being here. I know school hasn't started, but work continues through the summer. And thank you everybody for being here for all these months and helping with all of these policies and regulations. And see you next week when school starts. Night. Bye.